Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This episode is a little bit different from our normal resets. In this series titled Let the Men Talk, we're speaking to men to gain a different perspective on what's important to them, what they're experiencing in their lives, and what it's like being a man in today's day and age, from careers, family, relationships, self improvement to legacy. Today, I'm joined by Kamani Randall. Kamani Randall is 24 and is based in Houston, Texas. Working to live an authentic and productive life, Kamani is helping other young men do the same as the founder and host of Himprovement podcast. The purpose of this show is to help young men develop their character, identity, and mindset in order to activate their potential and achieve their goals in life. Welcome, Kamani.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you. Kamani, it's wonderful the work that you're doing is focused on helping young men. Talk to us about how you got into this work and what really sparked your interest into going down this path.
All right. So where do I start? Really, you could say the main thing that played a huge factor in this was growing up for 22 years of my life, being told the same story of the way to make it in life and to find fulfillment, or at least like your purpose in life should be to go to school, make good grades, get into a good college, get a good job, have a family, kids, buy a house, work for the next 30, 40 years, and then die. And the thing about it is that once I turned 22, whenever I graduated, got the degree from the good school and got the good job, within the first 3 months of being there, I kind of had, you could say, a quarter life crisis where I thought to myself, wow, I'm going to be doing this same thing for the next 20, 30 years of my life, Monday through Friday, and just be living for the weekend. How great is that? Not great at all. And I figured there has to be something else that I could go and pursue. There has to be something else I could gain fulfillment from, somewhere I could actually offer some value and feel like, I actually have a place in this world, right? And that's what embarked me on this journey to eventually do Himprovement. And so just knowing what the natural skills that I happen to have were from having that self-awareness, and then also knowing the different things that are of most interest to me, with me being a big fan of podcasts and such and YouTube content, I knew that that might be something that I might be able to carve out a niche in, you could say. And then for this specific topic, I would say the reason why I got into young men's personal development is just because of how much of a pivotal role it had in my development from my graduation in high school all the way until now being 24. And so the thing about it is this: I had a father, I had men in my life, and I definitely learned a lot of valuable things from them. But one thing I'll say is, from gaining more self-awareness, from being in an environment like a college where I was around a lot of people that came from a different culture, a different background, it really helped me to notice a lot of those areas where I was really lacking in my personal development, not only as like, a man, but just as a person in general. And so I kind of started embarking on that journey, reading books, trying to improve different aspects of my life, watching YouTube content, trying to get help with that, really just trying to develop myself into a more well-rounded man. And more as I got further and further along, I really just realized more and more how ignorant I was and how underdeveloped I was in some areas. And when you gain that sort of awareness, I'll say, it definitely does make you think back to your upbringing and maybe why you might not be developed in those areas. Because the fact of the matter is, you can really only learn so much from the people before you is the amount of development that they've done within themselves. And so I really noticed that a lot of those areas where I was lacking, it's because maybe the people that were before me hadn't developed themselves in those areas enough to actually be able to equip me well enough to be able to handle those things when I moved into adult life, whenever I got the job and started doing these things on my own. And so just seeing how much of an effect it's had on my life just in the 6 years I've been doing personal development, and how it's completely changed the trajectory of my life, even making graduating college possible, even making it to where I could get the decent job possible. And, just with the interactions I've had, with women, with friends, all those sorts of things, and better ones of family, it really just showed me the value of it. And I wanted to share what I know with other young men that might be experiencing similar things.
Wow, you said a mouthful.
Yeah,
When you were
I know that was a
about,
whole lot, huh?
when you were talking about living for the weekend, I feel like that really impacted or hit me like a ton of bricks, because that's part of my own journey where I feel like I was dreading
Hmm.
Monday mornings, Sunday nights.
Absolutely.
I feel like my anxiety started to pick up. I'm like, what am I doing? Where it's only Monday through Friday that I have to give all this time Monday through Friday, and I only get the weekend to like relax. And it's like Saturday was only the time where I could take a deep breath, and then Sunday was like prep for the Monday through Friday. And
Right.
another thing you said that is definitely an awakening. I don't want to say woke. I feel like woke is like it's too overused, but it was like an awakening for me when you talked about fulfillment.
Right.
Because the most recent passing of the former Miss USA, people are like, well, I thought she had it all, or it looked like she had it all. And it's like you can be accomplished and not be fulfilled. You can be degreed up and not be fulfilled. You can have the good job and not be fulfilled. And when you're on this like path of self-discovery, self-improvement, there's so many things that you start to like realize that maybe you didn't recognize before. And I like that you use the term awareness, and I've been using the term like once you know, then you can't unknow, right? You're like, oh
Right.
wow. So things just start like revealing themselves to you, or things that you didn't initially recognize, now you can't help but see it. And you realize like, wow, like how underdeveloped, or how, I haven't spent enough amount of time or commitment to being the best version of me. And what does that look like? What does that mean? What does that sound like? um, I'm curious to know, because we talked a little bit offline, and you alluded to a little bit. You said, I had, present father in my life. However, I still realized there were some things in terms of like that self improvement, that self development, that daily growth that, I wasn't quite on that path yet until I got to college. And it sounds like you had some exposure to different ways of thinking, different perspectives. Talk to us more about what that dynamic was like between father and son. So it's like I had a present father, but there's some things I realized, we didn't explore this in our household.
Hmm. And yeah, before I hop into that, I'd just like to add something to what you mentioned before about developing that awareness and being able to know that what you're working towards doesn't give you fulfillment. One thing I'll say about that is that, of course, the majority of people that we come across probably in their life unfulfilled. That's one of the most common things they're selling people's deathbed, that they wish that they had lived for themselves instead of living for other people. And you have to think to even get to that point to chase fulfillment instead of, let's say, the status or whatever, because that's really what most people do, chase status with the income or with the job role or whatever. It takes a large amount of self-awareness and personal development to get past that point to where you can be aware of that and know that that's not what you should be working towards, because it's not going to give you fulfillment. So I just wanted to add that too. But to answer your question about some of the things that I noticed growing up that may have led to my lack, and this is just coming from my personal perspective. This may not be the experience of all young black men, but I know me as a young black man, this is how it affected me. One thing I'll say is that certain standards among the men in my community that I grew up in, and the men, that were in my family, certain standards that they had for what a man should be, while it may have created good results maybe in some aspects of life, I would say it definitely did have its cons as well. I would say there's no perfect way to raise kids, but there's going to be trade-offs with everything. And I think that this one just happened to have more negative consequences than the positive. And something that I'll point out specifically is, I guess you could say, like the hyper masculine type of standards that you could say were placed on me and placed on the men before me. And as a result, while I may have made men that could, deal with, you could say, a physical pain, that sort of thing, and could, find ways to, you know, promote their status by, maybe talking to people in a certain type of way, or maybe carrying themselves in a certain type of way. It really made a bunch of men, you could say, that, at least emotionally, weren't really skilled when it came to handling their emotions, being able to unpack them and understand them. It more so led to a lot of the men finding ways to avoid having those feelings and addressing them. And a lot of times it would default to anger or maybe trying to have an outburst in a way that could get control back, you could say. And so that's really the main thing. And when you have that lack of emotional intelligence, that lack of emotional awareness, when you aren't promoting that as a skill that a man should have to, for one, experience emotions that could be negative, and two, try to understand why you're having them. When you don't have that as something that's prevalent or happening in your community or in your house, it makes it to where you develop children that are emotionally dwarfed and will have those same problems, if not worse. And that's the thing you could say happened to me, having this expectation for myself for how a man should be, how a man should conduct himself. While I may have met the standard with that somewhat, it made it to where like things that were actually productive in life, actually having productive relationships, actually being able to develop self awareness, being able to recalibrate and gear my life into a way that I want it to go. It made that stuff extremely difficult because part of having that hypermasculine identity, thinking that you all have it handled, trying to be the man instead of just a man, to be able to do that, you have to have, I guess you could say, an inflated sense of ego and a lack of self awareness. And you
Oh,
can't really
wow.
acknowledge weakness either.
Wow. How do you think that affected you, or affected you, and also affected your relationship with others?
So I'll say this: whenever you move through life like that, whenever you have like, an ego or an image of how you're supposed to be and how you want people to see you, and you're looking for that approval of people, you kind of think about it like this. I try and make like an analogy or like a metaphor or whatever, but think of like, okay, you have your body, and then your ego is something that you project out. Like, let's say like your head is like a projector, and this ego is like this image you have of yourself. That's what you're projecting out. That's what you see yourself as. That's who you think you are. And that's what you're going to see for the most part, but you're really not going to see the body that it's coming from. Everybody else can see the source, they can see who you actually are. But this thing that you're projecting, that ego, is what you think people perceive you as or what you want to be perceived as. And the thing is, the further that ego is from who you actually are, it really creates you could say, an identity crisis, and it really poses a threat to your mental and emotional health. Because the thing is, when people do things in your environment to challenge that view that you might have of yourself, which really isn't challenging you per se, or how do I put this? It's challenging the ego, the way you're trying to put yourself off, when really that's the way that you deserve to be treated. You could say, kind of just based on who you actually are, because the results that you're going to get in life, in your relationships and such, are going to be based on who you are as a man, not who you're projecting yourself to be. And so that's the thing. Whenever that happens, whenever, let's say, you go do something and you're thinking you're, the guy, and the result you get doesn't align with that, you take that personally, you take it as an attack. And a lot of men will, from at least from what I noticed and what I would do too, is we would act in a way to try and gain that control back, or that sense of confidence back, or that sense of worth, even if it was in a negative way, as opposed to kind of sitting and reflecting and saying, maybe the reason why this stuff is happening to me is because I'm not that guy that I think I am. Maybe I haven't done the self-reflection or the inner work to actually get these results that I think I deserve. And maybe I need to go back to the drawing board. Maybe I need to read a book. Maybe I need to talk to a therapist to actually become that guy, instead of just trying to pretend to be him. Did
Hmm.
I explain that clearly enough? Or let me
I'm
know.
fol-
And
I'm following, and what I hear is like an identity crisis
right.
of what we want to be perceived as, or what we want people to think about us versus what we really are. Uh, I saw something the other week, and it's kind of what as you're talking, it's reminding me of public appearances versus private realities, and putting on a face, a facade of what masculinity looks like, what success looks like, what I am the man looks like, what you think it looks like, or what you've been told it's supposed to look like, when that's not really what's going on internally. It's almost like a, a disconnect, and the energy put towards being something that you're really not, but this is what you're told you're supposed to be, trying to create like, I don't know, the thing that comes to mind is like a facade. Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the issue with that, right? Whenever you're looking to other people to tell you who you need to be, and it's not even, or let me backtrack a little bit. Whenever you're being held accountable to standards that you didn't help set, that's
Mm.
never going to be a positive result. And this is the issue. A lot of times young men will look at these standards, that are set by the men around them, and they'll think that's what they need to be as a man, but they never do actually look at the results that these men are getting and ask themselves, is that even the type of life that I want to lead, right? And so it kind of goes back to my own identity crisis that I had, because I was one of those guys too, I guess, at least still to a degree. I don't feel like anybody is just, 100% perfect. I see myself coming up short sometimes. But the big issue for me was doing the same thing, looking at what the men before me did, looking at what they say is what a man is, looking at the opinions of unhealthy women and thinking I had to gear myself to get their approval. All those things bundled together really just made an unhappy, toxic person. And it wasn't until I actually kind of sat down and looked at the men and looked at the just people in general that I really respected and said, what is it about these people that I respect so much? It wasn't until I did that that I was able to actually sit down and come up with the identity that I actually wanted to craft for myself. And one thing I'll say is that whenever you sit down and actually think of what your priorities and values are and you craft an identity based around that, it completely changes your life, because no longer does, the opinion of this person down the street or maybe a parent who may not even be living a life that you even want, no longer is that stuff so important. The thing that's most important to you is these values that you have for yourself, and if you're actually measuring up to them. And that's what you want people to hold you accountable for, the identity that you set for yourself. If I tell my friends that, my core values, let's say, are empathy, integrity, accountability, self-mastery, devotion, productivity. If I say something like that, those are the standards I want my friends to hold me accountable to. If I say that I'm a Christian man, I have Christian values, I want my church peers to hold me accountable to those standards, not the stuff of society that might not even be geared towards the life that I even want to live. That's the thing. People want to take this same, you could say, this mold or the same like copy and apply it to their life without even thinking about whether or not it even fits into the life that they want to live. And so that's the main thing I would say. Getting rid of that need for approval and figuring out what type of life you want to lead and actually thinking of what the criteria are to live that life. Hopefully I answered the question.
You did. And one of the things as you were talking that came to my mind, what's the track record with someone? So if you're looking to emulate or follow a similar path, question that. How has that worked out for them? You
Yeah.
know, if this is the standard or something that you are aspiring to be or following, this is the path that you're following, where has that led that particular person? And I think what's also interesting too is, even if it's a family member, even if it sometimes, you'll have generations that just follow something, whether it works or not.
Hmm.
And we can be the people that break that cycle if it's not leading to where we would like to go. Because sometimes I think people get into, well, my daddy did it or my mama did it. Well, just because there's been patterns of people doing something, if it's not a goal that you have or it's not a standard that you would like to um, place your life on, then why continue to follow that same pattern? I wanted to ask you a question about when you were talking about like looking for outside approval or validation. What would you say to young men right now when we're in this influencer like follow uh, type of generation? How do you address that?
It's really tough because, to a degree, the opinion of our peers is always going to be at least somewhat important to us. I would say you just want to at least make sure it's the right type of peers.
Mm.
But really, the biggest thing is going to be going back to that identity work that I was talking about. And so, if you want to avoid the pressures that may come from feeling like you need to fit some sort of outside mold or meet some sort of outside standard, I would say really the best thing you can do is base your identity in values, like I was saying before. Because here's one thing that I don't think a lot of guys think about, right? So, let's say that you want to base your identity and your self worth on your income, on the car you drive, on your status that you get like from your job title, right? From the women you have sex with, that sort of thing, right? If your value is based on like all these external things, the issue with that is that those are not things that you have full control over, right? At any point in time, let's say if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, that business could fail. Let's say you base your worth, you base your identity on being, in a relationship, and your girlfriend could break up with you. Let's say that your income is something that you base your identity and self-worth in, right? A recession comes, just like what happened with COVID at the beginning, and your business loses half of its value, or you lose half of your net worth or something in your investments. If your identity is based on all these external things that aren't fully in your control, you can go from being on top of the world, right, to feeling like the smallest little ant, the smallest little parasite on the planet. And so the thing about having a value-based identity is that despite whatever it is that happens outside of what you can control, with the values, you can always control how you exercise your values, if you're going to exercise your values in the decisions that you make. Okay. And so to give you an example with the same stuff I mentioned before about being a business owner or about your like income being things that are important to you, that can still be important. But the thing is, you're going to gain your value and your identity and your self-worth based on how much in alignment am I with these values that I think a good business owner would have. How much in alignment am I with these values I think a good husband or a good boyfriend would have? Because that's really all you can control. And at the end of the day, as long as you know that you're in alignment with your values and you did as much as you could to be in alignment with those values, even if, let's say, you lose the girlfriend or you lose your business or you lose your job, that sense of self stays intact. Do you kind of see what I'm saying?
That makes perfect sense. It talks about what you're anchored in, because
Right.
there's so many variables throughout our lives that can change that we have no control over. And as you were talking, it reminded me of when I used to also, when we talked offline, share with you, I used to live in Houston, and when I had left a job because it just wasn't a great fit for me, I recognized that like almost was in a state of grief after that, because I had attached my identity to my job and to my title and those type of things. So when they were gone, it's like, well, who am I? And
Hmm.
I had a great mentor. And also, I did a lot of self development work that reminded me you still are who you are. You weren't those things. That's not what you are. It's not who you are. That was your occupation. That was a place you work, but it's not like to the core of who you are. And as you talked about, like your values, and when you understand what you are, if you are grace, if you are integrity, if you are something, it can't be stripped from you based on all of the outside things going on in this world. Because there'll always be things. There'll always be disappointments, setbacks, rejections. Um, but if you are anchored into what your values are, those things, it reminds me like of a palm tree. You may bend, but it doesn't break you because you're anchored so well in that. Uh, One of the things that was coming to mind too is as we were talking about identity, um, we talked a little bit offline about this, but how your how Black culture, we've noticed as
Hmm.
two young Black people, that there's a huge sense of value or worth that is connected to like superficial stuff, the car you drive, the clothes you have, even titles. What's your I guess take on that? And do you have like a theory of why that is? And you talked about how it's important to have like that value based identity. What do you think is like driving? people's strong connection, especially to, I'm thinking like material things, especially in Black culture.
Hmm. So this is really a tough topic to unpack. And of course, I'm not like an anthropologist or something. It's not like this is something that I've studied, but just based on my own personal development work, overcoming some of these things that I feel like were prevalent in the Black community that were limiting me, I would say it's a few factors. For one, being in America, I would say America in general has a very status driven culture, you could say. I would say it's a really big thing in the US, but kind of drilling down more into like the Black community issue, you could really say that it's rooted in our culture being strongly based, or I guess poverty being a strong foundation
Mhm.
of Black culture. And so to kind of elaborate on that, because I know without context, that could sound disrespectful. But if you think about it, people talk about the effects of slavery and that sort of thing, right? So the Black culture started as a poverty culture because it started as a slave culture. You don't get That's pretty much lower than poverty, I guess you could say. If you think about a lot of things today that are considered Black culture, is rooted in that same stuff. Soul food, that's a poverty thing, right? Rap, if you think about how rap first started, a lot of stuff that people talked about, their struggle and everything, that's rooted in poverty too. And so one of the things that's also a side effect of poverty is that due to the fact that I feel like people struggle more with providing for themselves on the primary level, which is like, food, shelter, transportation, that sort of thing. Of course, among poverty people, they're going to place the most value, or be able to at least see the most value in those same things whenever someone's showing that they have those things at a high level. If you're going out to eat at all these good restaurants, if you're dressing in all these nice clothes, if you have the nice car, if you have the nice house, that's going to be the most distinguishable thing among people who might come from, you could say, a poverty culture, right? And I would say that, if you look at where am I going to go with this? If you look at people who maybe aren't as focused on that in their culture, one thing you'll see is that it kind of gets to where it's not on that primary level anymore, where it's like the material things, showing that like you're self-sufficient. That doesn't become as pivotal in their importance in their culture. You'll see it kind of moves to like the secondary level outside of your primary basics, where it starts to get more towards, let's say, values or principles, the way you may go about things, right? Or maybe like even the tertiary level, the next level, which where it goes into like your emotional and personal development. You can see that like some of the cultures, just around the world and even in America, where some of the people are doing the absolute best, you can see that their focus has kind of moved past that primary level where it's like the physical stuff, like, the needs, the things that you actively use. And it kind of goes more towards the, I guess, the principle and the values, and I guess the emotional and personal development. So that's, I guess, kind of like surface level, at least what I think the issue is.
No, that makes great sense when you've, I guess, like your foundation has been like, especially in America, like rooted in lack.
Right.
Once you're able to attain something, goods, clothing, it's like, let me showcase it and let me
Yeah.
get the best.
Easy way to show that you've, I guess, made it, you could say. And it's also easier
Exactly.
to fake it too, since it's just a matter of buying the stuff,
Mm,
right?
yeah, that's a good point too. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, as for you, you are, clearly doing the work and continue along this journey. And I like to say, like, this self-improvement is a process. It's continuous, like, refinement and polishing. um what would you say is most important to you right now in your own development journey?
I would say, so the main things I'm working on right now would be developing, I guess, honing my social intelligence. I wouldn't say developing, because I think I have solid emotional intelligence right now. It's just I know I have a habit of getting lazy with it. If there's not a lot of motivation for me to, let's say, maybe spare someone's feelings, or if the result of an interaction may not be something that I'm all that invested in, I noticed that my social intelligence, I tend to not utilize it. I might be more brash in like the way I may deliver something. And so that's something that I'm trying to work on and develop to where, I give that same sort of, you could say, respect, and I guess get that same level of respect, in most, if not all situations, unless the situation calls for me to communicate at a lower level to be able to better relate to the people that I'm talking to. That, and another thing I would honestly say, is confidence, because I don't think you can ever get enough confidence. I would say, compared to the mean, I'm more confident than average. But the thing is, I still see a whole lot of room for me to grow in that, just with how that would help me with the podcast, and even with getting better relationships, really. Because, it's one thing to like be content, I guess, where you are right now, but to know that you have the potential to be able to do better and attract more quality people, just if you work on your confidence more, that's more than enough incentive for me to do that. Because of course it leads to, not just better women that are going to come into your life, but better relationships too with your friends. You're going to attract better guy friends too, to be able to hang out with and be able to spend your time with. It really just improves the quality of your life. The better you are and the more comfortable you are expressing yourself. And then of course having that ability to be able to vocally do it.
Okay. All right. Well, for everyone who is looking to build some stronger relationships and keep in touch with everything that you're doing, before I ask my final question, where can they connect with you?
Yeah. So they can find me at my website. If you go to himprovementpodcast.com, you will see my stuff there. You'll see all my content, and you can find me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Or also, if you prefer social media, you can follow me on Instagram at Kamani AR1, and that's the number one.
Perfect. Perfect. So the final question is, what is the greatest lesson you learned in your reset process?
I would say the greatest lesson that I've learned is to take accountability for the
Mhm.
end result. I may not be able to affect everything that goes on in my life, right? But what I can do is take accountability for how I'm going to have that affect me. And so, I can't, no, we can't always have perfect parents, right? We can't always have a perfect upbringing. We can't always have perfect circumstances, but we can determine how we're going to respond to that. And one thing I'm grateful for is that I made that choice to move out that mindset of saying, look at what's happening to me. Oh, this will never happen to me because of this. And well, here, let's see what I can do with this hand of cards. Because I don't know if you played what is it? I think it's 21, where like you can kind of, or like poker, any card game, even though your hand might not be the best, the way you play it, you can probably beat other people with a better hand. It just depends on, your mindset and how you go about it.
I love that. It's perspective, or turning your lemons into lemonade and working with what you got.
Yeah, yeah, you could put it like that.
Thank you so much. I am so appreciative. This was excellent.
Hey, I'm glad that you enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed it as well. Hopefully, I offered some value, but always enjoy talking about this type of stuff.
Love it. Thank you. All right, everyone. Most people chase status. Make sure you have the right type of peers. Choose a value based identity. Of course, the reset experience does not stop here. Share this with someone who needs their own reset. And remember, a reset is always available to you.